The day I discovered that my own son had secretly sold my late husband's watch was also the day I received a message from heaven, one that changed my life forever. My name is Nancy Miller, 66 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. Even now, as I tell this story, my heart still tightens when I think of that fateful Tuesday morning. I was in my son David's kitchen, preparing breakfast just as I had done every day since moving in with him and his wife over a year and a half ago. Ever since John Miller, my husband, passed away 10 years earlier, making breakfast for my son and granddaughter had been my only comfort to the one thing that made me feel useful. David, now 40, had always been a kind, thoughtful son, or so I believed. His wife, Emily, 38, worked as a sales associate downtown. She always spoke softly and seemed polite. But over the past few months, I'd begun to feel something change. Strange looks, awkward silences. That morning, while I stirred sugar into my coffee and arranged pastries on a plate just the way John used to like them, I overheard their voices from the other room. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the walls were thin, and their voices carried clearly. Emily was talking about debts, unpaid bills, and expenses that were draining them dry. Then I heard her say they'd found a way to fix their financial troubles. David replied quietly, "Yeah, we should do it soon, before Mom notices anything." Before I notice, what? My heart pounded. My hand trembled as I held the spoon. A wave of dread swept through me. Then Emily's cold voice cut through the air. "That gold watch of his must be worth a lot, and she won't even notice if it's gone. She's been so forgetful lately." In that moment, my world collapsed. They were talking about John's gold Omega watch, the only thing he'd left me, a keepsake that held the soul of the man I loved for 48 years. That watch still carried his scent, a gentle, woody fragrance I could never forget. John had worn it every day since he was 25, a graduation gift from his father. Whenever I felt lonely, I would hold it close to my chest, and it was as if he were still there, protecting me, loving me. I pretended not to have heard a thing, forcing myself to keep making breakfast with shaking hands. When they came down to the kitchen, I acted as normal as I could. David kissed my cheek and said, "You're the best mom in the world," while Emily smiled and complimented the coffee, as she always did. But now, I knew behind those smiles was cold betrayal. This pain was different from the pain of losing John. When he died, it was the sorrow of fate. This was the sorrow of betrayal from my own flesh and blood. After they left for work, I rushed to my room, hands trembling as I opened the drawer where I kept the watch. The dark blue velvet box was still there. I opened it slowly and exhaled with relief when I saw it, gleaming, with the small word Omega engraved on the back. I pressed the watch against my chest, feeling the chill of the metal against my skin, as memories flooded in. I remembered the day John proposed exactly 50 years ago on a Sunday afternoon after church. He kept glancing at his watch, nervously taking my hand as he asked, "Nancy, will you marry me?" I remembered the soft click of the watch hitting the wooden nightstand each night, that tiny sound that once lulled me to sleep in happiness. And I remembered his final days, when he held the watch and whispered in a frail voice, "Keep it, Nancy. It's all I can leave you, not for its price, but because it holds all the love I have for you." That day, I couldn't do anything else. I just sat in the old chair, staring at the watch, trying to understand how the baby I once held in my arms could now plan to steal the only piece of his father I had left. Did David understand what that watch meant to me? Or did he and Emily see it as nothing more than a piece of metal, something to be traded for cash? How could they be so cold, so calculating, to steal the last thread connecting me to the man I loved most? When they came home later that afternoon, I was still sitting in my room, clutching the watch as if letting go would mean losing the rest of my heart. David knocked on my door and asked if I was okay. I looked at my son, trying to find the sweet little boy I once knew. and almost told him everything, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the fear of admitting a truth too cruel to face, or a faint hope that I had misheard. That evening, during dinner, I brought up John, sharing our memories and the story behind his watch, a piece of our family's history. David only nodded absently and said it was nice that I still had something to remember Dad by. Emily nodded too, but she avoided my eyes. I could see the worry and guilt in her expression. After dinner, they shut themselves in their room again. This time, I deliberately moved closer and heard everything. David said next Thursday would be the perfect time since I had a doctor's appointment and would be gone all morning. Emily agreed immediately and said she had already found a pawn shop downtown in Portland that would buy the watch without asking for any paperwork. Everything had been carefully planned, every step, every hour, so I wouldn't notice until it was too late. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there clutching John's watch, my mind spinning with confusion. Part of me wanted to scream, to cry, to tell them that this watch was my soul, the heart of the man who still lived with me in spirit. But another part was afraid to destroy the family completely, afraid of being seen as a bitter old woman who didn't understand the Caldens' struggles of the younger generation. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I felt an emptiness deep in my chest. It wasn't just fear of betrayal. It was the painful realization that I was no longer respected in my own home. Maybe, in their eyes, I was just a burden, an old, stubborn woman clinging to worthless things, someone they tolerated only out of family duty. But when I held the watch in my hand, feeling its familiar weight, something inside me changed. I could almost hear John's voice whispering in my ear, "Nancy, you're stronger than this. You're not just a lonely widow." I remembered that I had built a family, that I had loved deeply and been loved deeply, that I had faced life's storms beside a wonderful man. I deserved respect, dignity, and compassion. That morning, I made a simple but firm decision. From that day on, I would never leave the house without the watch. I placed it in a small velvet pouch, tucked it inside my large handbag, and carried it with me everywhere like a lucky charm. When Thursday came, I pretended to forget my doctor's appointment. I told David I wasn't feeling well and would reschedule for the following week. I caught the frustrated glance they exchanged, and in that instant, I knew the truth. They really had planned to steal the last keepsake I had of John while I was gone. The cold look they shared cut through me like a knife. For the rest of that awful week, I kept the watch with me at all times, hidden in my bag like a sacred secret. Every time I got up to use the restroom, get a glass of water, or stretch my legs, I took the bag with me. When Emily asked, in her falsely sweet tone, why I was carrying my purse around the house, I quickly lied and said I was afraid I'd forget to take my medicine on time. She seemed to believe me. But from that day on, she started watching me more closely, as if trying to figure something out. Sometimes I could feel her eyes fixed on me when she thought I wasn't looking, and it made the air in that house so heavy I could barely breathe. Lately, David had become more irritable than usual. He complained about everything: the meals I cooked with love, the television being too loud, even the sound of my slippers shuffling across the floor at night when I went to the bathroom. Emily began making remarks that sounded harmless but stung deeply. Things like, "You've been so forgetful lately, Mom. I guess old age is really setting in." She would go on to say that caring for an elderly person was difficult, that it required patience and understanding, and that not everyone had the emotional strength to handle it. On the surface, her words sounded caring, but underneath them was subtle mockery and quiet disdain, a cruelty that hurt more than any shouted insult ever could. One evening, during dinner, David said something that left me stunned and speechless. As he calmly ate his meal, he said he had spoken with a geriatric specialist about my health and thought it might be best for me to move somewhere with professional care. Emily immediately added that she knew of a well-known assisted living facility in Seattle where I would have friends my age, social activities, and full medical attention. She spoke as if she were offering me a wonderful gift, but I understood the true meaning behind her words. For the second time in just a few days, my world collapsed. They didn't just want to take John's watch anymore. Now they wanted to throw me out of the house, to send me to a nursing home as if I were mentally ill or some useless child. I tried to stay calm and gently asked, "Is that really what you both want for your mother?" David replied with a fake tone of concern, saying it was for my own good that they were busy and couldn't give me the care I deserved. But I knew the truth. I was nothing more than an obstacle in their financial plans, and getting it rid of me was simply the easiest solution. That night, I cried harder than I had since John's funeral. I felt as if I'd lost everything: my family, my home, my dignity, and my place in this world. I held the watch tightly and whispered, as if speaking to my husband, "John, please give me strength. Show me the right path." I begged him to guide me, to tell me whether I should fight or surrender to the fate my son and daughter-in-law had already decided for me. The next morning, after they left for work, I made the boldest decision of my life. I took the watch, slipped it into my purse, and caught a bus to downtown Portland, something I hadn't done in months. I didn't have a clear plan, only the need to find out the true value of the watch, the thing they seemed so desperate for. I thought that if I knew what it was worth, maybe I could find a way to help them financially without losing the only keepsake I had of John. Maybe I could sell something else, or find another solution. I stopped by 3 different watch shops downtown. Everywhere I went, the watchmakers marveled at its craftsmanship and pristine condition. One man, around 60 years old, said it was an extremely rare collector's model, worth far more than I had ever imagined. A younger repairman asked bluntly, "Are you really planning to sell it? I know a few private collectors who'd pay top dollar for something like this." When the watchmaker mentioned an estimated price, my heart clenched and my breath caught in my throat. I walked out of the shop with a heavier heart than when I had entered. Now I finally understood why David and Emily wanted that watch so badly. It wasn't just an emotional keepsake, it was a valuable asset. They wanted to take it, without a single thought for how much it meant to me. When I came home later that afternoon, I was met with a pleasant surprise. Lucy, my 16-year-old granddaughter, was sitting in the living room, waiting for me. She had skipped her last class of the day to visit something that always warmed my heart. Lucy was nothing like her parents: gentle, thoughtful, and genuinely kind. She immediately noticed my sadness and asked directly, "Grandma, what's wrong? Are you feeling okay? Or is something bothering you?" In that moment, I wanted to tell her everything about her parents' betrayal, about the pain I carried inside. But I stopped myself. I knew better than to drag a 16-year-old into the cruel world of adult deceit. I didn't want her to turn against her own parents because of me. So I gave her a faint smile and said softly, "I just miss your grandpa, Lucy." Some days, that feeling gets so heavy it's hard to breathe. Lucy hugged me tightly with the kind of pure, warm affection only a young heart can give. She said she missed her grandpa too, especially the funny stories he used to tell about his younger days. That hug, unexpected, sincere, and full of love, gave me a strength I thought I'd lost. I remembered John's words, "Nancy, you're stronger and braver than you think. There's a resilience in you that even you don't fully see." Maybe it was time to find that strength again. In the days that followed, I kept the watch with me everywhere I went. But I began to notice that David and Emily were growing uneasy. They exchanged strange glances when they thought I wasn't looking, and often stopped talking the moment I entered the room. Then, on Friday, something happened that changed everything. I was hanging laundry out in the backyard when the landline phone suddenly rang. Since both David and Emily were at work, I hurried to pick up the phone, thinking it might be a friend or just a wrong number. On the other end was an older man's voice. He introduced himself as Mr. Anderson, the owner of an antique watch shop in downtown Portland. He said he had just purchased a beautiful gold Omega watch, but while cleaning and inspecting it, he noticed something that made him uneasy. My heart began to race as he explained that the couple who sold the watch claimed it was a family heirloom, yet he had a strong feeling the real owner didn't know it had been sold. Mr. Anderson said his conscience wouldn't let him rest, and he wanted to meet me in person to explain. In that moment, it felt like a bucket of cold water had been poured over me. David and Emily were no longer just planning, they had already done it. As it turned out, the watch I'd been carrying was only a cheap replica. My voice trembled as I asked Mr. Anderson to describe the sellers. He gave a detailed account. It was unmistakably my son and daughter-in-law. They had seemed rushed, accepting the first price he offered without negotiation, something completely unheard of for such a valuable item. I thanked him and hung up, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the receiver. I ran straight to my room and opened the drawer where I kept the familiar velvet box. It was still there, but when I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Inside was a cheap watch, nothing like John's Omega. They had switched it, probably while I slept. I collapsed onto the bed, tears streaming uncontrollably. It wasn't just the loss of the watch, it was the realization that my own son could betray me so cruelly. They had stolen the last memory of the man I loved most, and still walked around the house pretending nothing had happened. That afternoon, I sat frozen, trying to comprehend the sheer coldness of what they had done. They hadn't just plotted, they had carried it out, with chilling precision. When they came home that evening, both acted perfectly normal, chatting, smiling, even asking, "Mom, did you have dinner yet?" As if they hadn't just committed a crime against the very woman who gave them life. I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I needed to meet Mr. Anderson face to face. The next morning, after they left for work, I took the bus into downtown Portland. The address he gave was on a quiet old street, where weathered wooden signs and vintage storefronts stood like witnesses to time. When I walked into the shop, I saw Mr. Anderson standing behind the counter, his hair silver white, thick glasses resting on his nose, with the calm presence of someone who had spent a lifetime surrounded by delicate, timeless things. He recognized me instantly by my voice and greeted me with a kindness that brought tears to my eyes. He said that ever since buying the watch, his professional instinct told him something was wrong, and in over 40 years in the business, that instinct had never failed him. Then he stepped into the back room and returned, holding a small metal box. When he opened it, and I saw John's gold watch in his hands, my heart nearly stopped. It was truly his, the watch I had cherished like a part of his very soul. Mr. Anderson explained that while inspecting the mechanism, he had noticed something unusual. A small gear was loose. When he removed it to look more closely, he found something hidden inside. Carefully, he opened the back of the watch and showed me a tiny golden key concealed within a secret compartment of the movement. Next to the key was a folded piece of paper, small and delicate, with John's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The note was short, but so clear, so full of emotion, it took my breath away. "My dearest Nancy, if you are reading this, it means the time has come for you to discover what I've prepared for you. This key opens safety deposit box number 237 at Regional Bank Downtown Branch. You are far stronger than you ever imagined. With all my eternal love, John." Mr. Anderson looked at me, his eyes filled with both amazement and respect. He said that in over 40 years of working with antique watches, he had never seen anything like this. It was clear that my husband had planned everything with care and deep love, a secret gift left behind just for me. He said it was an honor to be the one who helped me uncover it. I asked him how much he had paid for the watch, and when I heard the amount, I trembled with anger. David and Emily had sold it for a ridiculously low price, just a fraction of its real value, probably out of greed or fear of being questioned. Mr. Anderson, understanding my situation, said he was willing to return the watch if I simply reimbursed him the money he had spent. But I refused. I told him he deserved to keep it for his honesty and kindness, when he could have easily stayed silent and profited instead. I only asked to borrow the key so I could take care of the matter at the bank, and he agreed immediately, promising to keep the watch safe until I decided what to do. I left the shop with the tiny key in my hand, my heart pounding harder than it had in years. John had hidden something important inside that watch, and I needed to find out what it was. I went straight to Regional Bank in downtown Portland, just a few blocks away. When I told the branch manager the whole story, he looked at me attentively and then, with a sense of solemn respect, led me to the safety deposit area, almost as if he were conducting a sacred ceremony. Box number 237 was fairly small, but as I turned the key in the lock, my heart raced wildly, as if I were opening the door to a completely new life. Inside was a brown leather case and a long handwritten letter from John. My hands were shaking so badly that the manager offered me a seat. I opened the letter and began to read. My dearest Nancy, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it's time for you to know the truth I've kept for so many years. I've always known you were stronger and braver than you believe, but I also know this world doesn't teach women how to be financially independent. The letter explained that during the last 10 years of his life, John had secretly been saving money in an account under my name. He sold company shares, took on extra engineering projects, and even sold a piece of land he'd inherited from his father, all in silence. He wanted to prepare a secure future for me, so I could live freely if the day ever came when he was no longer here. When I looked at the attached account statement, I froze. It was a very large sum, enough for me to live comfortably and independently for the rest of my life. But that wasn't all. Inside the leather case was also a property deed for a beachfront apartment in Cannon Beach, Oregon, which John had bought 3 years earlier with part of that secret fund. The letter said the apartment was fully furnished and ready for me to move into, that he wanted me to have a place of my own, somewhere I could live happily, peacefully, and freely. I know that after I'm gone, you may choose to live with David, John wrote, but I want you to always have the right to choose your own life. You don't need to endure disrespect or coldness from anyone, not even from your own family. You deserve to be treated like a queen the way I've always seen you. Use this gift to live freely and happily, my love. I sat there in the bank, sobbing, filled with gratitude, love, pain, and even anger at myself. John had provided everything, given me the tools for independence, but I had chosen to imprison myself in patience and dependence, believing that was a mother's duty. He had prepared freedom for me, while I had chosen the walls of my own heart. The manager brought me a glass of water and told me to take all the time I needed. I read the letter 2 more times, reviewed every document carefully, and saw that everything was legal and in my name. John had truly thought of every detail right up until his final moments. When I left the bank, the afternoon sun was already dipping low, and I knew I was no longer the same fragile woman who had walked in that morning. I had completely changed, no longer a dependent widow, but a woman with choice, strength, and freedom. On the bus ride back to Portland, I thought about how I would face David and Emily. Now, I knew I didn't have to pretend ignorance, nor did I have to endure any more pain. I had options, a place to go, and a new life waiting. But I also understood that I needed to face them wisely. They had deceived and stolen from me, but I didn't want revenge born of bitterness. I only wanted to reclaim my dignity and show them that I was not the weak, easily manipulated woman they believed me to be. When I got home, David and Emily still weren't back yet. I walked into my room, looked around, and for the first time in my life, I realized clearly This is no longer my home. This is not where I belong. Where I belong should be a place filled with respect and love, a place where I can live in peace without fearing betrayal from the very people I love most. I took a small suitcase and began packing a few clothes and essentials. I didn't take much, just enough for a few days. The beachfront apartment in Cannon Beach had already been prepared by John, fully furnished, and I could buy whatever I needed with the money he had left for me. When I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock, I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the confrontation that would change everything. It was time for David and Emily to see that the weak woman named Nancy Miller, whom they had once looked down on, no longer existed. In her place now stood a strong, independent woman who would no longer accept disrespect, not even from her own family. When they walked in that evening, I was already sitting in the armchair in the living room, unnervingly calm. The small suitcase sat beside me, and on the coffee table lay copies of the apartment deed and the bank statements John had left behind. They greeted me as usual, but quickly sensed the heavy air in the room. David noticed the suitcase first and asked, "Mom, are you going somewhere?" I answered calmly, "Yes, I'm moving out." Emily gave an awkward smile and said I hadn't mentioned any trip. I looked straight into their eyes and said, "I know you sold your father's watch." The room went silent, as if all the air had been sucked out. I saw David's face go pale, and Emily swallowed hard, trying to stay composed. David tried to deny it, saying I must be mistaken. Maybe I had just forgotten where I kept it, but I immediately pulled out the fake watch they had swapped and held it up before them. I told them I had met Mr. Anderson at the watch shop, that I knew every detail of the sale, exactly how much they received, and how nervously they behaved during the transaction. David started to interrupt, but I raised my hand and said firmly, "Let me finish." I told them the pain I felt wasn't from losing the watch. It was from discovering that my own son and daughter-in-law had betrayed me. They had broken the most sacred bond of all, the trust between a mother and her child. Emily began to cry, saying they had been desperate because of debt and didn't know what else to do. David jumped in, trying to justify himself, saying it had only been a temporary loan, that they planned to pay it back once things got better, and that his father would have understood, because family comes first. I looked straight into my son's eyes and said quietly, "Your father would never have understood a betrayal like this." Then I picked up the stack of papers from the table and told them about the secret key hidden in the watch, about the secret bank account, and about the beachfront apartment John had bought so I could live freely. When David saw the numbers on the documents, his eyes widened in disbelief, and Emily asked if it was all real. I confirmed that everything was legitimate, and in my name that John had planned every detail so I could live with independence and dignity. I continued, "The irony is, while you were planning to steal from me out of desperation, I actually had enough to help you, if only you had been honest and treated me with respect." But now, the trust was completely shattered. David stepped closer, his voice trembling, apologizing and admitting he had made a terrible mistake and would do anything to make it right. Emily sobbed, saying they hadn't known about the inheritance, that if they had, they would never have touched John's watch. I looked at them both and said slowly, "The problem isn't that you didn't know about the inheritance, it's that you no longer respect your mother." I told them I had heard enough whispers about sending Mom to a nursing home and how taking care of old people is such a burden. They both rushed to deny it, but I stopped them. "Don't lie anymore." I stood up, picked up my suitcase, and said I would move to the apartment at Cannon Beach, that I needed time to think about the future of our relationship. David pleaded, "Mom, please don't go. This house won't be the same without you." I simply replied, "You should have thought about that before you betrayed me." Emily asked through tears, "Will you forgive us? Can we start over? I looked at her and said, forgiveness is one thing, trust is another. I told them they had broken something fragile and precious, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. Before leaving, I said I didn't want revenge or to make anyone suffer. I just wanted to live in peace, with dignity, without the fear of betrayal. I added, if you truly feel remorse, show it through your actions, not your words. If you want to rebuild this relationship, it has to be based on mutual respect, not manipulation or pretense. David tried to hold my hand, saying I was being too extreme, that every family makes mistakes and eventually reconciles. I looked him straight in the eyes and said softly, maybe you're right, but true reconciliation only comes with sincere repentance and real change. I called a taxi and sat quietly in the living room while they pleaded with me to stay, because I already knew my decision was final. Emily said they would return every single dollar they had earned from selling the watch, that they were willing to sacrifice anything to make things right. I replied, money isn't the real issue, it's the betrayal and lack of respect you've shown me. When the taxi stopped in front of the house, I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the door. David followed, asking if I would keep in touch, or at least call from time to time. I told him I needed time to heal, but that I wasn't cutting them off completely. Just before stepping out, I turned back and said the words I had kept inside for months. You've treated me like I'm useless, as if age made me unworthy of respect or care. I told them that John had once taught me, no matter how old someone is, every person deserves dignity and love. The taxi took me straight to Cannon Beach. On the way, I looked out the window at the glowing lights of Portland and felt both sadness and relief. I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving behind an old version of myself, the woman who once endured being dismissed in the name of family. The woman named Nancy Miller, who stepped into that taxi that night, was no longer the same one who had left the house that morning. When I arrived, I opened the envelope with the key, slid it into the lock, and opened the door to the beachfront apartment. John had thought of everything. The apartment was spotless, warm, and fully furnished. The sheets smelled fresh, and there was even some basic food in the fridge. On the refrigerator door, there was a small, handwritten note. Welcome to your new beginning, my love. I sat down on the sofa and looked out the window. The endless blue ocean, the gentle sound of waves, a peaceful contrast to the suffocating air of David's house. For the first time in 10 years since John passed, I truly felt that I was home. That first night in the apartment, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything that had happened so quickly, and how God had used my own child's betrayal to open my eyes. If they hadn't sold the watch, I might have lived my whole life without ever knowing the legacy John had left for me. Now I understood. God had turned their wrongdoing into a blessing. The betrayal that should have broken me became the doorway to freedom. Mr. Anderson once said his conscience compelled him to call me, but I knew it was God who had touched that man's heart. I remembered John's favorite saying, God writes straight with crooked lines. Sometimes what feels like tragedy is actually a hidden blessing. David and Emily selling the watch had caused me deep pain, but it was something that needed to happen so I could realize I was not a helpless widow, but a woman with choices, strength, and the right to live life on her own terms. That morning, I had still been a dependent, betrayed woman. By nightfall, I had become independent, in control of my own destiny. John had given me more than money or an apartment. He had given me the chance to rediscover myself. And God had chosen the perfect moment for me to understand that. I knew the days ahead wouldn't be easy. I would have to learn how to live alone again and decide how to face my family. But for the first time in a very long while, I felt in control of my life. And that feeling, I realized that night, was priceless. Those first few days at the Cannon Beach, the apartment were a mix of loneliness and discovery. Every morning, I woke to the sound of the waves and felt a strange kind of freedom that took me several days to identify. It was the absence of fear, the fear of being judged, disturbed, or belittled. For the first time in years, I was free to be myself, no longer needing to please anyone, no longer needing to prove my worth. During the first week, David called me every day. Each call started the same way. He asked how I was feeling, if I needed anything, how I was eating. I answered politely, but briefly. I still didn't know how to feel about them. Emily also called a few times, crying and apologizing, saying she missed me, that the house felt empty since I left. I listened in silence, no longer angry, but not yet ready to forgive. I knew that words were easy, but real change would take time. In the second week, I received a beautiful surprise. My granddaughter Lucy showed up at my door, a backpack on her shoulder and tears in her eyes. She said she had argued with her parents and wanted to stay with me for a few days. When I asked why, Lucy told me she had found out about the watch being sold and confronted her parents about it. She said she felt ashamed of them, that she couldn't believe her parents had done something so cruel to me. I hugged her and said, "You are not to blame for the mistakes of adults. Grandma will always love you, no matter what." I let Lucy stay for 3 days, and those were 3 wonderful days. During that time, I experienced what it felt like to be loved genuinely, not out of obligation, not out of self-interest. Lucy came to me simply because she wanted to, because with me, she felt at peace. We talked about everything, about her grandpa John, about her dream of becoming a veterinarian, about the books she was reading. It was a love, pure, simple, and real. At the end of the second week, Mr. Anderson called, saying he wanted to return the watch to me. I told him he could keep it as a thank you for his honesty, but he insisted that it wouldn't be right. We agreed to meet at my apartment. When he arrived, carrying the watch in an elegant box, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. Mr. Anderson said that after doing some more research, he discovered the watch was even more valuable than he had thought, but regardless of its worth, he understood it was priceless to me. When I held the watch again, I felt as if John was right there beside me, smiling and approving every choice I had made. It was Mr. Anderson who suggested I find a lawyer to organize my finances and make sure everything was legally in order. He introduced me to a young attorney named Sarah, a professional, kind, and dedicated woman. She helped me restructure my investments, transfer funds into higher yield accounts, legalize the apartment paperwork, and even draft a will so I would never have to worry about the future again. By the end of the first month, David and Emily asked to visit me. I agreed, feeling strong enough to face them. When they arrived, I immediately noticed something had changed. They were humbler, less prideful. David apologized sincerely this time, not vaguely, but acknowledging every mistake. He said that over the past month, he had done a lot of thinking about how they had treated me, not just about the watch, but during all the time I had lived with them. David admitted that he and Emily had once treated me as if I were just a housekeeper, not a person with feelings and needs of my own. Emily also apologized, admitting that she had sometimes been cruel with her comments about my age and abilities. I told them I appreciated their apologies, but trust takes time to rebuild. I said that here by the Oregon coast I had found a new version of myself, a woman who is strong, independent, and self-respecting, and that I would never go back to being the weak woman I once was. They nodded, saying they understood and respected my decision. Then David did something that truly surprised me. He returned all the money they had received from selling the watch, even though I had never asked for it. He said they had both worked extra hours all month to earn it back. I refused to take the money, saying, "Keep it. What I need isn't money, it's respect." From that conversation, our relationship began to rebuild, this time on an entirely different foundation. They started visiting me regularly, but always with notice, always respecting my space and my time. They often brought Lucy along, and we spent warm afternoons together on the balcony overlooking the ocean. Emily had completely changed. She began asking for my advice on important matters, told me stories about her work, and even sought my guidance on how to raise Lucy. David changed too. He no longer saw me as a fragile mother who needed care, but as an independent and respectable woman. I was even more surprised to learn that they now spoke of me with pride, not embarrassment, like before. David told his friends, "My mom is a modern and courageous woman. She decided to live by the sea on her own, and she's truly happy with her new life." In the following months, I built a peaceful life for myself. Every morning, I watched the sunrise, sipped coffee on the balcony, and read books I had never had time for before. I made friends with my neighbors, joined a morning walking group for seniors, and realized I was healthier and more energetic than ever because I no longer lived to please anyone else. I cooked the meals I liked, watched the shows I loved, and decorated my apartment however I pleased. It was a simple kind of freedom, but it changed my entire life. At the end of the second month, I did something symbolic for my new beginning. I bought a small car and learned to drive again after many years. The feeling of being able to go anywhere, anytime I wanted, was beyond words. Lucy smiled and said, "Grandma, you look so different now, happier, more confident than ever." And she was right. I had come to realize that growing older doesn't mean becoming dependent or forgotten. It can be a time of freedom, wisdom, and joy. John had given me more than money. He had given me the chance to find myself again, to be loved for who I truly am, not for what I do for others. Now, looking back, I see that the painful betrayal was actually the greatest gift David and Emily ever gave me. They unknowingly forced me to face myself, to discover my strength, independence, and ability to start over. I still stay in touch with my family, but now it's a relationship built on genuine respect and love, not on duty or pretense. They visit me because they want to, not because they have to. And I've learned the most important lesson of my life. It's never too late to find out who you really are. It's never too late to reclaim your respect and dignity. It's never too late to be truly free. John taught me that through his final gift of love, and now I live every day to honor that precious lesson. Nancy's story is a fictionalized journey inspired by real experiences, only the names and places have been changed. Sometimes, within our own homes, we discover that pain doesn't come from strangers but from those we love the most. Nancy chose to speak up, to step out of silence, and reclaim the dignity and freedom that God had always intended for her. But if it were, you caught between family ties and the sting of betrayal, would you choose silence, or would you stand up? There is no perfect answer, only the faith that God always turns heartbreak into blessings for those who dare to live truthfully. Thank you for listening to this story. Stay until the end of the video. I have 2 more special stories about love, courage, and faith that I believe you'll want to hear next.